Today on the She Found Motherhood podcast, Denie joins us and talks about her birth story for her little girl, Iris. She struggled with multiple miscarriages and then severe anxiety during her pregnancy and into postpartum. She also discusses her induction, which took a few days so that she could finally meet her little baby, Iris. She's very open and honest and frank in her discussion and really has some great advice for those who are going through pregnancy and really struggling with anxiety.
Welcome to the She Found Motherhood podcast. We are doctors Sarah and Alicia, maternity physicians and moms who have been through it all. We want to empower you with knowledge so you can have the best pregnancy, birth, and postpartum experience you can.
She Found Health and She Found Motherhood is meant for general medical information only. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. This information does not apply to every situation. If you have questions or if you've received different advice, please contact your healthcare provider. Always seek the advice of your physician or another qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. The views expressed by She Found Health and She Found Motherhood and our guests are not representative of any of the institutions with which we are affiliated. Some of our podcast episodes are sponsored so that we can keep getting great info out there to you, our listeners. We only partner with companies that we truly believe in. Some of our links and suggestions may be affiliates, and we would appreciate you using them to help fund this important work. Now let's get to it.
My name is Dennie. I used to live in Victoria for many years. That's where Iris was born. And then during the pandemic, we got out of there and moved back up island to Campbell River, where a lot of our family live. And my husband and I actually started our own in-home daycare. So we spend most of our days with Iris, which has been quite lovely. And we've got a great set of kids and we're really enjoying it. And we miss Victoria a lot, but love it here as well.
Well,
It's
that's
been pretty nice.
exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people some big changes through the pandemic, hey?
Yeah. Yeah. We were tossing the idea around and then before the pandemic. And then once that hit, we just felt like it was time. And we had an opportunity come up during that time too that just really worked out well for us. But I definitely don't recommend moving during lockdown with a 6-month-old baby
Yes.
to a new city. It's not fun.
Yes. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Why don't we thank you for coming on today and sharing your birth story with us. Why don't we start around most people's journey into their birth story, which is that process of getting pregnant. I don't know if you had any struggles or if things were pretty easy, but why don't we start there and you can let us know a little bit about how that process went into pregnancy, into early pregnancy.
Yeah, we decided to start trying and we were pretty casual about it at first. And then about a year and a half went by and nothing had happened yet. And then my husband was actually diagnosed with a thyroid condition. And then about a month after he started the thyroid condition, I got pregnant. And then shortly after that, we did lose that pregnancy. And then I got pregnant a few weeks after that miscarriage, lost that pregnancy again. At that time, I was seeing Dr. Harmon at Grow Health. And so she sent me to do some blood work. So we took a month off, did some blood work. I got pregnant again right away. So clearly that wasn't the problem, but got pregnant again right away. That cycle that we started trying, she suggested that I take the baby aspirin daily as soon as I got pregnant. So I did that. And that pregnancy stuck. It was Iris. We actually have had 2 miscarriages again this past year. I'm actually week into the 2-week wait right now. So fingers crossed for this one. Iris was the only pregnancy where I took the baby aspirin daily. The OB that I've been seeing in town here, he really thinks that's the thing. Like they've done all the tests. They found nothing, absolutely nothing. One of my pregnancies, we even had an ultrasound with a heartbeat and everything and lost it shortly after. So we're really hopeful that the baby aspirin kind of does the trick like it did with Iris. So fingers crossed this time. So that was a bit of a journey getting pregnant, And then it was really great once it was awesome that I was pregnant, but I had just crippling anxiety, just awful anxiety my whole pregnancy. The pregnancy itself went really well for the most part. I had started with a touch of hypertension and it stayed super steady my whole pregnancy. I went off of the baby aspirin at 36 weeks. And so my blood pressure went up a bit. And that's when they decided to induce me.
Gotcha. Can I ask you a little bit about, if you're willing to share, about your anxiety?
Yeah.
Did you struggle with anxiety before pregnancy, or did it mostly come out during pregnancy?
I've had a lot of loss in my family, a lot of family deaths, including my dad when I was 13. And my stepdad again a few Christmases, actually 7 Christmases ago now, I think too. And around those like areas of my life, I've definitely had struggled with anxiety dealing with that at times, but there have been times in my life where that hasn't been a struggle. And so I think just dealing with so much loss in my life that really probably aggravated the anxiety during the pregnancy. And it was definitely like my very first pregnancy. It was pretty early in the first trimester, but there was no anxiety. Like, it was just, oh, it's so exciting to be pregnant. And there was no anxiety. And then after that, it was pretty bad. I don't know what happened, but my last pregnancy, I lost it around 10 weeks, super late. So I often find out pretty early when I miss my period that I'm pregnant, like around 3 or 4 weeks. And so I was about 10 weeks, had known for a while that I was pregnant and somehow was able to maintain a pretty steady level of feeling. I felt great. I didn't have that anxiety up until the last day or two of that pregnancy. And so that was great. But yeah, I've had moments of time where I did have anxiety throughout, but nothing my pregnancy and then postpartum.
Gotcha. And did you have any extra supports through your pregnancy around the anxiety? Because I know a lot of people are struggling with anxiety. I think anxiety was a huge issue before the pandemic, and now
Mhm.
layering that on with a pregnancy, a lot of people are really struggling with anxiety who haven't necessarily struggled as much before or have had kind of episodes, but it's really ramping up in pregnancy just with all of the other things. Did you reach out for extra supports during that time? Did you talk to your care provider, or did you just keep it hidden inside?
I It was a mishmash, actually. I was so grateful for the Grow Health team. There were definitely a few times where I called like the after hours line, just panicking because like I thought something was wrong, and I just ever grateful for how patient you guys were with me during that time. So I think that really helped. I do think I could have used like whether a counselor or support, honestly, a peer support group, I think probably would have been the best. I had another friend who was pregnant at the time, but she didn't really have the same level of anxiety as me. I think actually had a few friends pregnant at the same time. I definitely had the worst level of anxiety throughout my pregnancy, but they were great to chat with. Like one normal for another pregnancy is not someone else's normal. So that doesn't always help too. So that yeah, I think definitely Grow Health was great. Dr. Harmon was great. Like we would chat in appointments about some of my anxiety. And I remember in my third trimester, the public health unit got hold of me to start my initiating conversation. And she had just hit me on a day when my anxiety was at a huge peak. And the nurse practitioner I spoke to was just amazing and really supportive, and then checked in with me quite a few times after that throughout my pregnancy. So I think that was really great.
Awesome. So
Enjoyed that.
yeah.
She referred me to the postpartum, like Pacific postpartum support group, but I never really got in touch with them. And I think I probably should have.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think it's really
Mhm.
important that people recognize that they're not alone and that other people are struggling. But like you said, in different ways sometimes. And I know we're starting to get that Pacific postpartum support in Victoria. One of my colleagues is working on a project to
Mhm.
bring that in. But it's interesting that you say that around anxiety, like pregnancy as well, because she's focusing on that postpartum piece.
Mhm.
But just wondering if we can maybe figure out a way to bring in that peer support during pregnancy as well, because it is challenging, and it's hard when
So
I
challenging.
imagine. I never had anxiety, but I can imagine as an anxious pregnant person talking to another person who's not anxious at all. There's just probably a bit of a disconnect there. And so maybe having that opportunity to discuss with people who are struggling with similar things would be a helpful thing.
Mhm. I totally agree with that.
All right, I'll start looking into that. So we've gotten to your induction. Blood pressure's creeping
Mhm.
up. So we've
Yeah.
decided we're going to induce you. Your team's decided around induction for you. Talk to us a little bit about what that kind of, how you felt about that and what that process looked like.
I was honestly relieved to be induced. I remember we went to the doctor. It all happened. I went for a non-stress test and they were like, "Hey, your blood pressure over the last 2 hours is just up and we're not getting it down." The OB said, "Okay, we're going to take the baby out at 37 weeks." And then you're 37 weeks on Saturday. So my husband goes, "So next Saturday we're having the baby?" And she's, "No, Saturday, Thursday, it's Friday." Saturday. He was like, "No." Like, what? But he was a little bit panicked. We didn't end up starting the induction until the Monday. But for me, with my anxiety, I was relieved because I had the total misconception that once I saw her on the outside, my anxiety would go away. That's not true. So for me, I was relieved. I was like, fine, I'm happy to do this process. We had a doula, one of my best friends who happens to be my neighbor now. We both moved to the same city in the pandemic. She was our doula for our group. We did a lot of work with her and a lot of kind of online courses and everything to prepare for the baby. So I was personally prepared for like any outcome. I was like, I just wanted it to be in a hospital and there to be drugs involved. That was my parameter and whatever happened. So I was ready. I was prepared. My doula, again, she was so amazing, living in Vancouver at the time. So she hopped on a ferry, came over to Campbell River and like stayed with us. So they told us Monday, just wait for that phone call from the nurses, and then you'll come in and we'll start the induction. I was gently dilated. And so Monday comes. It wasn't until the evening we get to the hospital. And so they decided I was dilated enough to do the balloon catheter thing. And so we started that process. And that was a struggle. It wasn't going great. Finally, it was done. And I really being pregnant, had to go to the washroom. So I go to the washroom and then I just hear this, yeah. So I come back out with a balloon in my hand and I'm just like, "Hey guys, we have to go do this." And so they were like, "I think we need more tools for this." And so we got
Maybe
it
that's how
again
I was
and
involved in your
like it
induction, is I misput in the balloon catheter. It happens sometimes.
it they needed to get a new, what is that tactile thing called again?
The
It's like
speculum.
completely escaping my mind.
Speculum.
The speculum. Yeah. They had to get a bigger speculum so they could like, yeah, I don't know, just the mechanics of my body was not working. And I have that thing where your cervical cells kind of grow outside of your cervix a little bit. And so like I find cervical checks are not great. They are not great, but I find them particularly uncomfortable. And after being through that first one, I was like, "Can I please have the gas this time?" They're like, "Yeah, have
So
the
the
gas."
nitrous oxide, yeah.
And then I was experiencing, yeah, yeah, and that really helped because it's not comfortable, and it took a long time to get the second balloon in. Like, my cervix was just being just a tricky guy that didn't want anything going in there. We had success. It instantly triggered the most intense back labor ever. Like, I had been having some low-key contractions for the last day or 2, and it was just, like, instant back contractions. Because I remember being told, "Hey, the balloon is pretty comfortable, like, you can go home and sleep, and then the next morning you come in and you're relaxed," and for me, it was just instant back contractions. They took out as much water as they could because they know you can take out a little bit of water, that helps, and, like, absolutely nothing. And then I was offered a shot of morphine in the butt, and I said, "Yes, please." That that helped. So I was able to go home. My husband and Julia, the doula, we went home, and then at 4 o'clock in the morning, I just shake my husband awake, and I was like, "You take me back now. Take me back now." The morphine had completely worn off, and he called the doctor and said, like, "Can we come back for another shot?" And he did, and just if you're having back contractions, like, try and lay down in the car if you can. That was sitting up in the car was probably, like, the worst thing that I've ever done. I just screamed the entire way to the hospital, my poor husband. He was very patient, but then the shot of morphine did the trick. Like, I remember passing out shortly after the shot of morphine. I passed out, they woke me up and said, "You can go home now." We went home, and then a few hours later, we went back. Like, I think we went back around 11 o'clock in the morning and then started the whole induction process. And they stuck me on the drip and started going. And then that was going for a little while. And I think then about 10 o'clock at night, they said, "You're the least progressed. We're taking you off and sending you home." And at that point, like, it had been a long day. I was tired, hormonal, hadn't eaten all day. And I was like, "They're taking my baby away from me." Like, I was convinced that they weren't letting me have my baby anymore. And that was hard. It seemed like it should be simple, but that was weirdly traumatizing to be sent away when you think you're going to have your baby and then you're not. And so that was a pretty traumatizing thing. I was not prepared for that. And then, so we went to the McDonald's drive-through on the way home because I wanted French fries, hadn't eaten all day. And then I remember after we got through the drive-through, I checked the bag and all I wanted was French fries, and there was no French fries in my bag. So I told my husband to pull over, and I don't know what I said to those employees. I don't even remember. I just came out with a bag full of French fries. I couldn't eat them all.
Hey, Sarah, do you know what I've never asked you? Did you take a prenatal course when you were pregnant?
We did. Even though I'm a maternity care provider, my husband and I thought it would be an important process for us to go through together.
That's so cute. It must have been so hard for you guys to coordinate your busy schedules, though.
Oh, tell me about it. I was a medical resident at the time, and he was working full-time. We really struggled to find a course that would fit our needs and ended up doing a semi-private course that still was challenging to schedule and quite expensive.
Wouldn't it have been nice for you guys to have access to an online course with evidence-based content that you could do from the comfort of your own home or on your own time at your own pace?
You're telling me if I had had access to something like our Pregnancy to Parenthood Prenatal Masterclass, it would have been a game changer.
And that's the big reason we put this course together, to provide parents with access to a reliable, comprehensive prenatal education from the comfort of their own homes and the ability to watch it and rewatch it when and where they choose.
Plus, it's got so much great information about preparing for the fourth trimester, which I'll admit, I felt really unprepared for. We focus so much on labor and birth when we're pregnant without understanding how challenging breastfeeding in the fourth trimester can be.
I hear ya. And that's why we put together such a comprehensive module all about what to expect for the fourth trimester and for your newborn.
If any of you listeners are pregnant and thinking about a prenatal course, I may be biased, but I would 100% recommend our online course. Head on over to www.shefoundhealth.ca/masterclass to check it out.
We promise you won't be disappointed or your money back.
We went home, slept the night, was still having some contractions and stuff. And then the next day, so I guess this is day 3. I don't even know anymore. I think it's day 3. We get back to the hospital and they decide to just ramp up the Pitocin and break my water right away. They stuck me on the epidural. I asked for an epidural, got an epidural. They ramped up the Pitocin, and I think it was Dr. Harmon that day, maybe. Actually, I don't know. She was there at one point. But my water broke, and then just nothing really was happening. I was dilating slowly, and they could not get the monitor to properly read my contractions on my belly. Like, they were trying, the nurses were just putting it in every position possible, and this was going on for the whole day, and they just could not figure it out. They even put the little sensors up inside my cervix at one point. Like, the sensors weren't reading my contractions properly at all, and but I was definitely having them, and this went on for a whole day. So everything was going so slowly, and then finally, day 4, I'm definitely having a lot of contractions, dilating super slow. And then the OB comes in and he said, "I think it's time for a C-section." And so it's okay. And he's let me just do a cervical check. And then he did a cervical check. And then when he did that, so much more fluid came out. And so they think what had happened is my water, not all of it came out. So she was just floating around in there. And so they said, "We'll give you a few hours to sleep." At that point, I think it had been at least 24 hours of being in there. And it was so slow. I'm barely sleeping because they're playing around with the monitors on my tummy the whole time and stuff. They said, "We'll give you a few hours to sleep, and then we'll check you out and see what happens. And if you haven't dilated since then, if you haven't dilated much since then, it's C-section time. And so I went and slept for a little bit. My husband went and got a haircut so he could look fresh for the baby. Like
That's
my
awesome.
the doula stayed with us then. Yeah, he was like, I need to look fresh for the baby. It was a huge priority, very important to him, and he was glad he did it. But so I slept and they woke me up after a few hours and checked me in. At that point, I was like 9.5 centimeters dilated. And they were like, oh my God, this is actually happening. Like, wow, this is actually happening. Like we had to. And then, so it just kept progressing pretty quickly from there. And the OB who was on at the time, he kind of wheels in. He wheels in the ultrasound. He's like, I just want to check the baby's position. And so he checked the baby's position and said, everything looks amazing. And he just said to me, I didn't think we would be here. I honestly thought we were doing a C-section today. I did not think we would be here. And then, yeah, and then it progressed pretty quick from there. And then that feeling of needing to push is like the most intense feeling in the world. Like it needs it. I liken it to it feels like you're going to take the world's biggest poop.
So
It's
was
such an
your
intense feeling when you have to
you had
push.
an epidural. So did the
Yeah.
epidural manage the pain of the contractions, but you could still feel that urge to push?
Yes. I had it only really worked on one side. So like my one, I think it was my left side felt most. It felt a lot of it. So I definitely really felt that urge to push. It was pretty intense. And we did that whole waiting game to let the baby kind of drop down as much. I know there's probably a term for it, but let the baby drop down as much as you can before you start pushing. And that was intense. Like I remember just staring at that little button on the epidural, waiting for that light to start blinking again so you can get another hit. And that was pretty intense. And I think I lasted about an hour with that though, until I just said, this is too much. Like it's time to go. And I think it was maybe 45 minutes, an hour. It was a while. Like it was pretty intense. And then once it was time to push, that was honest. Like I was afraid for the pushing. My whole pregnancy, that was what I was the most nervous about. I thought it would be really hard. I was really afraid for that. Felt really nervous about it. Thought it was easy. It was a relief compared to waiting. Like that pressure that you have, that was hard. That was the hard part. That I thought the pushing was easy. The whole thing was done in about an hour 45 minutes, and it was fast. It felt like 10 minutes. It was so fast. But yeah, I thought that was super, super easy. I got and like, yeah, I think that was such a relief. She came out. She looked great. Apparently my husband's first thought was, because one of her arms was a bit blue, and his first thought seeing her was, "Oh my God, we're going to have to amputate her arm." It was dead.
It is
Yeah.
interesting though.
So,
It's really
but she,
interesting people's perceptions of situations and their first reactions. I know with my delivery, my husband, who's not medical at all, was quite he's amazed anybody survives deliveries. And my
yeah,
first delivery was pretty normal, actually. It's pretty
yeah.
reasonable. But it's so interesting how what people's kind of brains go to immediately with these like
Yeah.
precious little beings, hey?
It's insane. Like I actually watched in the mirror the whole time. I was on the fence about whether or not I wanted to do that, but I'm glad I did. And it's insane. Like it's crazy. And she had the thickest, fullest head of black hair. So it was crazy just seeing this like head of a toddler coming out. And yeah, she just so much hair in the chubbiest cheeks. But yeah, it's crazy. She had just like this busted eye from the whole process. Like her eye was swollen and a little bruised for a few days after birth because they're just squeezed right out of there. It was
Sure.
crazy. But yeah, so the birth itself, it went really, really. There was another birth happening at the exact same time as me. I ended up with a second degree tear, but it was fine. So they actually had to run out and do the other birth while I was waiting. Like I had my legs up in the stirrups since we just ate pizza and cuddled with the baby until I got the stitches sewn up, and that part was fine. And yeah, it was like it was 4 days of labor, and like I went 36 hours that last time without eating a thing, which was It was fine at the time, but once it was all done, like all the adrenaline's off, you're like, dang, I'm pretty hungry now. That was the best pizza I've ever had in my life. It was so good.
Nice. Awesome. Off the bat, like, she transitioned well
Yeah.
and didn't need any extra support?
None at all, none at all. She was born at well, at that point, it was like 37. It was getting closer to 38 weeks by the time that was all done. But she was 7 pounds, 3 ounces, so a great size. Yeah, she transitioned super simple. She didn't really there was no issues. Oh, she had jaundice. She came out with jaundice. I had jaundice. My nephew was born with jaundice a few years ago, so we were prepared for that, but we were able to manage it with just feeding it out of her. We didn't have to resort to the lights at all. But other than that, yeah, she did really well.
And how did the transition over the next few weeks go for you? You've alluded to the
Yeah.
fact that the anxiety was not resolved with the birth of Iris. When she was in your arms, it did not solve all of the anxiety. So how did things go once getting home?
Oh, it was bad. I mean, like, I loved her, and it's such a strange thing. Like, I definitely loved her right off the bat, but she's also a complete stranger. You're just like, it's so weird to have never seen this face before. You are a stranger. And so it's so interesting getting to know them. But like I did, I very much loved her. But the anxiety just, it was bad. It was so bad. We had very few visitors in the first week. And I think that was great. With the jaundice, because I was having to feed so much more, like the sleep was pretty bad too. We did a night where Dr. Harmon actually suggested I take a Gravol and just pass out for a few extra hours while my husband stayed up with her and gave her a bottle. But my anxiety was just like off the charts. Like it was so bad. I just could not handle it. I think the tipping point for me, like she had a bit of like extra mucus that she had to work through when she came out of the womb. And there was a day too where she was just like coughing on that and working through that. And I just like panicked and called 911 because I thought she was choking. By the time they got there, she was completely fine. But I'm still glad I did it. Like it's still hot. And again, I continued to lean on that helpline a bit with after hour support just because I just didn't know. And then I had an appointment. I think you guys were really on top of it. I think at about 3 or 4 weeks postpartum, I came in for an appointment for myself. And I cannot remember which doctor it was at the time, but just said, I looked at your file and I think it's time for you to go on meds. And I said, yeah, I, I definitely agree with that. Then connected me with the public health unit. They had a peer support group, and that was just absolutely amazing. That was life changing. Like, I really recommend that if that's back up and running, like, do it. Absolutely do it. That was just tremendous support. Um, One of my friends who had a baby, she had a baby about a month before I did, and she kind of started dragging me out to the baby groups as well. Um, And so that was a huge life changer. I had no idea that once Iris was up to her birth weight or beyond that, that I could kind of like let her wake in the night anymore. I was still feeding her like she had jaundice. And as soon as I found that out, this kid started sleeping 4 to 6 hour stretches every night and then was sleeping almost through the night by like 4 or 5 months old. And that made just like the world of a difference to start getting those longer stretches of sleep in. And David too, my husband, he would take over and let me have some longer stretches of sleep at night. And like, if you can do that, if you can have somebody come in and let you have some sleep, then do it. Absolutely do it. Um, yeah, the anxiety was just, it was awful. I was not prepared for that. I didn't really feel depressed at all. Like, they kind of had the baby blues. Like I kind of had some cabin fevery feeling a little bit before we started getting out of the house and stuff, but not, I didn't really feel that depression, but the anxiety was insane. And it did continue a bit. Iris, like I mentioned, she was born with like a full head of hair and was wearing ponytails in her hair at like 3 months old. And it just attracted people like a magnet to her, and people would come up and like try and touch her all of the time. And that was a huge trigger for my anxiety. And people would say, oh, put her in the carrier, and people won't try and touch her. The lady tried to take her out of the carrier off my body in the store once, like a stranger.
It's
And
crazy what
so the
people will
carrier
do.
didn't stop any. Yeah, right? Like, even now she's 2 and has, like, curly hair almost down to her butt, and, like, I still see people, like, hovering, like, around her hair, and it's like, luckily the pandemic has stopped people from touching, but it's come pretty close a few times. But that stranger interaction, like, we could not leave the house without hearing 10 times in a row, like, "That's a lot of hair," and then having, like, at least 5 people try to touch her. And that was a huge, huge, huge trigger for my anxiety. And it just, not only because I was worried about germs, but she's also a part of me, and that's my personal space. You don't touch another person without their permission. And so that was a huge trigger for my anxiety. But taking the meds and doing the peer support group really, really helped. But I was like living like I was already in a pandemic, and we already had a giant jug of hand sanitizer on hand when the whole thing hit. Um, and we were able to luckily continue that online. We did the peer support group online, and throughout the pandemic, surprisingly, I was able to wean off the meds and get back to a place where I was okay. Unfortunately, every time I have a miscarriage now, it does bring back that anxiety, and it's something that I struggle with for probably a month or 2 after the miscarriage. And but I have like a lot of friends that have been really, really supportive about the whole thing, and unfortunately, some friends that have gone through the same thing as well. And so I definitely have a good support group around that. So I've been pretty lucky,
Just so
pretty lucky.
important. Hey, yeah, we talk about in our prenatal course that we have, we talk about kind of setting up for that postpartum support system, like doing your
Mhm.
best to set that up. You don't always know what you need, but really
No.
kind of having open dialogue with your partner around kind of supporting each other in their needs postpartum, whatever those are, figuring out who those people are that are really your rock and your solid place, and making sure that there's a system in place that they can check in on you frequently. Because oftentimes when we're struggling, we don't reach out, but if other people reach in, we might be able to kind of open up. And yeah, it's amazing that you found that peer support group and found that useful. That's such
Mhm.
amazing feedback to hear, really. So
Yeah.
that's really great. Thank you, Denny, so
Yeah.
much
You're welcome.
for sharing your story.
Yeah. Thanks.
And I will cross my fingers for the next week wait for you. And I wish
Thank
you
you.
all of the best in your journeys.
Thank you so much.
Such an open discussion. So thank you very much for sharing that, because I think a lot of people have gone through similar things, and this will bring
Yep.
them a little bit of knowing that they're not alone, right? Other people have, and to
Mhm.
reach out for those supports.
I really think we need to be a lot more open about all of that, because so many women do go through that, or people, like, so many pregnant people have miscarriages, and it's such a hidden thing. And so I've been pretty open about it, I think, through most of my journey, and pretty open about the anxiety as well, because I was just not prepared for how hard that would hit me. And I wish I was a little bit more prepared for all of that. And hopefully this next time it won't be as bad. I think a big part of it too was not knowing what was normal for a newborn. So I'm looking forward to at least a little bit knowing what is more normal than not.
Yeah, and I don't think you're alone in that boat. A lot of people the second time around just feel so much more confident, I think, in themselves and their judgment, because they have done it before. And no newborns are the same, but you can have a
No.
general idea. So even though you're wrangling a toddler, oftentimes from a just a kind of, am I doing the right thing? Are things going normally? There's
Mhm.
much more confidence in that. So that's wonderful. Awesome. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check out our website at www.shefoundhealth.ca and to sign up for our community for weekly bump blasts. Make sure to check us out on Instagram or Facebook at she.found.motherhood, and head on over to your favorite podcast app and leave a review and a 5-star rating. If you enjoyed this podcast, take a pic of yourself listening to it and share it on social. Make sure to tag us on it so we know to keep making them.